but tonight's tonight. And, you know, it's really an honor for me here at the bookstore to help launch this phenomenal book called Cortadito, which probably has the most incredible subtitle that I've ever heard. My Wanderings Through Cuba's Mutilated Yet Resilient Cuisine. Brilliant. I have known Enrique for years, but in one conversation that we had, Enrique talked about this essay that he had written. And we have this very small press called Books and Books Press. It's not something that we normally do. We normally work with illustrated books and art books and that sort of thing. But when he sent me the PDF of this, I said, this could be a remarkable way to begin a little bit of a series of small yet very important and meaningful books. And so this is the book that we published called Cortadito, with a beautiful photograph of Enrique on the cover. And I shouldn't say beautiful, but it's a cute photograph of Enrique on the cover. And maybe he'll tell us what kind of sandwich he's eating. Doesn't remember. But it's also an evening of family, an evening of friends, and there's no greater friend that Books and Books has than the person I'm going to bring up right now to introduce Enrique. My history with Nat Chediak goes back before I had a bookshop. It was when I was a high school student. Nat taught me all I know about film. It's because of Nat that I actually saw Shock Corridor. Who would have ever thought that a 17 or 16-year-old would see Shock Corridor? But that's all because of Nat that I saw that. My parents will never forgive him for allowing me to see that movie at the age of 16. But anyway, Nat Chediak, we all know who Nat is. He's now helping to run a remarkable theater across the street. It's showing a marvelous film now. It's going to premiere Room, which is one of the most talked about films of the year, come Friday, right? Friday. Oh, October 30th, so it'll be another week. And he'll tell you a little bit more about that maybe. But he's here to introduce his very good friend, Enrique Fernandez. Please give Nat Chediak a really warm welcome.
It's always great to be in the company of my grandson, Mitch Kaplan, who learned everything he knows from me. Anyways, this is really a treat. This isn't an invitation or an imposition. This was actually a request on my part. I picked up the phone and phoned my dear friend Cristina Nosti, who makes things happen for Mitch. And today is her birthday, so let's, you know. And I said, please, Cristina, whatever date you choose, let me know so I can make sure that I'm in town, because I want to, you know, I'd love to introduce Enrique and his book. Enrique and I go back a number of years, but that's irrelevant. What's relevant is the fact that, contrary to many people in this community, even people who are into the arts, Enrique is a man of many cultures. I have found by personal experience that people who are into one facet of the arts tend to gravitate and stay in that facet of the arts. In other words, if you love books, if you're into literature, then you become a huge book buff. You erect an altar to Mitch Kaplan in your home, and you live happily ever after. If you love movies, then you spend your life going from one art cinema to the next, surfing the web for films that you can't find elsewhere, and that's your habitat. And the same can be said for even more trivial or pursuits like gastronomy, the love of music. The thing about Enrique is, you know, he's cognizant and loves a great many disciplines, and our dialogue over the years has spanned not one, the obvious one, film, but music and food and even sartorial matters as well. So I mean, our friendship knows no bounds. Our tolerance for one another knows no bounds, for which I'm very grateful. And tonight he probably will clear a question of etymology for me. I was going to say how happy I was that this is a first even for Enrique, which is the publishing of a book. You know, I remember one conversation distinctly where I was reminded by Cristina that you were a greater author than Octavio Paz. And she didn't say that to me, she said it to Octavio. I'm a big fan, you know, but I've always wanted to hold an Enrique Fernandez book in my hands. And my eternal gratitude goes to Mitch for making that possible. I hope it's only the first, and I think if prodded, Enrique will give you a sneak preview of others to come. In any event, whether it's film, whether it's music, whether it's fashion, whether it's gastronomy, whether it's food, Cuban and otherwise, this is the man. And the one thing I wanted to clear up, I don't know if this is Talmudic wisdom or this is Jose Marti, but somebody said that the three things that we all should do is plant a tree, father a son, and write a book. Is that the Talmud or is that Jose Marti? Whatever. I'm very happy that I don't know what he's been up to in the Panhandle, and I don't know if you've been planting trees, but you're good for the other two. Enrique Fernandez.
Gracias, Natalio. Te pago después. I also want to thank Cristina de Cordova for inviting her family so we could fill this room. And it's only part of her family. Let me tell you a little bit about what I want to do. I want to read from this book. Because I didn't have a copy of the book until right now. I have it in paper, so I'm not reading from the book. I've actually abridged a few sections, so hopefully, you know, it won't take up too much time. And if you read in the book, it'll be more complete. And I'm going to read from it. I'm going to obviously take your questions, and then after that, I'm going to read from another text that I have ready for publication and hopefully will be published as a kind of dessert for you. The name of this book is Cortadito, and Cortadito is a Miami word, and it's not a Cuban Cuba drink. It's a Miami Cuban drink. The first time I ever had a cortado was in Madrid. I've been a coffee addict since I was a child, which I owe to my grandmother. That she was like, she addicted me to caffeine. Really not very nice, but that's what she did. Loved me dearly, but that's what she did. She made great coffee. And when I went to, many years ago, went to Madrid, and there's this thing called cortado. I think it's somewhat like what the Italians call a macchiato. So I thought, great. But then I started to find it in Miami. And of course, because we like to shorten things, we call it cortadito. You know, it's our term of endearment for everything. But it's not Cuban. I used to drink coffee in Cuba at little stands where men, only men, I don't remember any woman drinking it, would have a little cup of coffee standing in a certain way that Guillermo Cabrera Infante once described, which is to lean forward so you don't get anything on your white linen suit or your guayabera, and you put your hand over your chest in case when you're wearing a tie so you don't get coffee on your tie. Today, wearing jeans and T-shirt, I will stand that way to drink coffee. It's just, that's the way that I'm conditioned to do that. And the coffee cost, in the good neighbors, it cost a nickel. In the regular neighborhoods, it costs like 3 cents. But no cortados, no cortaditos. Cortaditos is a Miami phenomenon. And as a Cuban-American phenomenon. And here we are. This is one of the things that we have brought to the culture. Sometimes it becomes a kind of junior café con leche. Sometimes it's done properly. The best place to have it is Versalles, where the best cortadito is made with evaporated milk. There is some coffee over there and some evaporated milk if you want to try making it. And it sounds gross, but it's absolutely delicious. It's one of those secret vices of the Cubans, like croquetas, another one of the croquetas between two pieces of saltine crackers, which is like starch on starch, and it all sticks to your palate. It just feels so good. Anyway, I want to start. Well, this book came about because I was sitting here in the cafe one time talking with somebody about Cuban food, and Mitchell was sitting at the next table, and he joined the conversation, and he says, if you write this as an essay, I'll publish it. I wrote it, and he published it. And that's the kind of book deal I like. Awesome. Absolutely awesome. So, that's all I have to say about it, how this book came about. And I want to start reading, and bear with me. In the 1980s, a Miami Cuban-American of refined taste, Efrain Vega, opened a restaurant that, as we say in Spanish, hizo época, made an epoch. Its name was Yuca, the word for cassava, a staple food of the island since before Columbus. A signature dish at Yuca was caviar served with blinis made of cassava flour. Under Chef Douglas Rodriguez, Yuca launched its own Cuban revolution, the phenomenon known as Nuevo Cubano. It made sense for the times. Nouvelle Cuisine had infiltrated American restaurants and spawned new American cooking, basically taking traditional recipes and giving them the Nouvelle treatment. Everything was lighter, more refined, more elegantly presented, and that key word, innovative. Vega and Rodriguez were innovators. At Yuca, you could get mahi-mahi, breaded in crushed plantain chips and accompanied by a tropical fruit salsa, that kind of thing. Not everyone liked the food. Some were outraged by the prices, which were no worse than any high-end restaurants. It's just that Cuban restaurants were either coffee shops or mom-and-pop joints with modest prices to match. But Nuevo Cubano caught on, as did every kind of nouvelle turn on the traditional Latin menu. Rodriguez was the sole Hispanic in a group of innovative chefs, Miami chefs, who dubbed themselves the Mango Gang, and put the city on that's because they like to put a lot of tropical fruits on their sauces, and put the city on the national dining map. Their trendy restaurants were cooking up variants of Cuban staples that became part of the Miami high cuisine vocabulary. What matters to me most, however, is not this Cubanization of upscale eateries, but the motivation for Yuca. Quite simply, it was because Miami Cuban restaurant food sucked. Friends would come to town and ask me to take them to eat Cuban food, Vega told me, and I wouldn't know where to go. I sympathized with Vega, except that he took matters in his own hands and opened a restaurant. Frankly, I would have preferred a traditional menu with well-researched recipes prepared with the best ingredients and the most loving care. But cultural history demanded Nuevo Cubano, and that's what Vega's hot young chef was eager to do. Indeed, Rodriguez went on to become a famous restaurateur, opening a number of important spots in New York and elsewhere, including Miami. But no one was taking up the challenge of making traditional Cuban food at the highest possible level. Even the few decent Cuban restaurants in Miami were far from being the brainchildren of born-again Cuban foodies. In the meantime, I was traveling to Cuba regularly in the 80s and 90s as a journalist and sampling the cuisine of a country where history had devastated culinary quality. A regime bent on severing ties with capitalism and tourism disdained such bourgeois decadence as fine dining, and the economic hardships of the long revolutionary era, still going, meant a scarcity of staples for decent home cooking. On my first visit, I was appalled at how bad Cuban food was. Everything I remember from my childhood had disappeared. And since Miami Cuban food was, though abundant, mediocre at best, I concluded that a kind of culinary entropy was at work and that Cuban food was destined to disappear from the universe. Okay. Another fragment. If Cuban cooking is anything, it is Cuba itself. Memory, yes, but a very specific memory. The memory not just of my childhood, but of a place like no other in which to be a child, to be an adult, to be in love, to die. There is that poignant Pablo Milanés song about his friends who have gone into exile. The sad thing is not that they don't live here, he sings, but that they won't die here. The sad thing about all the Cuban food I eat outside Cuba is precisely that. It's outside Cuba. If, as Pablo Neruda wrote, there is death inside love, there is death inside cooking, which is a form of love. To die outside Cuba, to eat Cuban food outside Cuba. La tristeza del exilio. No matter how much of a reproduction of Cuban signifiers the Miami exile community construct, it's not the same. The poverty of the reproduction is striking. The food may be made from authentic recipes, but it's not the same. Nor is the strange joie de vivre of Cuban Americans who came here old enough to remember the old days. Those who experience the new days, already pretty aged, know very little. Only those who lived before the revolution know how truly sweet life can be. Obviously not my phrase. The peninsula and the island. The difference between nation and country. I've heard these and other concepts tossed around by Cuban artists and intellectuals in exile. Just as the great ideologue of Cuban American life, Gustavo Pérez Firmat, has wrought a sophisticated edifice of thought around the very nature of exile. He ends his brilliant Life in the Hyphen with a beautiful meditation on being Cuban inside and outside of Cuba, and how the twain can meet. It's touching, I confess, but I don't believe it. We live in nostalgia. My Spanish ancestors did, the morriña of the Gallegos, de saudade. Then the grief of exile among our greatest poets, Heredia, Martí. Yes, exile makes us cosmopolitan, so very much so. Will we pay a big price? We can't go home again. We can't love like we were born to love. We can't have a decent meal. A French concept entered popular gastronomic discourse some years ago, terroir. It came from enology, but jumped from wine to food. The soil, but not just that. For soil is topped by air, soaked by rain, baked by sun, and enriched by the decay of the fauna and flora that lives there, including humans. This is what my father missed more about his little hometown than about Havana, where he was, after all, a stranger. And this is why the food I enjoyed in his hometown tasted not only better than anything I'd had since my Cuban childhood, but soothed my body in unexpected ways. I ate everything offered to me. I drank all kinds of rum, much of it homemade, at all kinds of hours and in all kinds of quantities. I must say that I was living in New York at the time, and one day I started drinking rum at 6 a.m. and I thought, this is more decadent than anything I've ever done. No problem. I was hale and hearty, felt much younger than my years. I was protected by my father's terroir. My body moved differently. The weight of it sank to my hips, and I walked more like a Cuban. I am not one of them. Of that I am painfully aware, but my body was not aware. It had no truck with such subtleties and neuroses. My body wanted to be Cuban again, and my body wants to eat what it was programmed to consume at an early age. In my life outside Cuba, I look for what my body wants. I try to feed it, but it tells me, nope, that ain't it. It tells me that through my soul, which is why it makes sense that some victuals are called soul food. In the end, my food quest is spiritual. A lot of spirit is concentrated in that island. No wonder it beckons even to those who do not hail from it. Will I end my life like the dictator in Alejo Carpentier's El Recurso del Método? He's exiled in Paris from some unnamed Latin American country, and his cook scours the market for the ingredients of criollo dishes. That's all he wants. After all the power he wielded so ruthlessly, he wants the taste of home. He wants to eat home. So do I. I'm not an aficionado of Cuban food. My tastes have evolved beyond its criollo simplicities, its too Spanish sabor. By the way, and I have it somewhere else in the book, that Cuban cuisine, unlike its cousins, Dominican and Puerto Rican, it's very Spanish. And that, in some ways, throws the weight of the criollo mix toward the Spanish. And we eat a lot of potajes and a lot of chorizos and stuff like that. And some flavors that are more African and Native American don't quite have, they're there, but they're not center stage like they might be in some other cuisines. Nor am I a true connoisseur of Cuban music or Cuban art, literature, architecture, cinema. I'm not an aficionado of Cuba. I'm her lover. Her heartbroken lover. So I will continue to sample the crumbs that fall from her table and be thankful and resentful at the same time. My appetite for her, an unrequited eros, is never sated. I will continue to sample ropa vieja, vaca frita, boliche, tasajo aporreado or en penca, pastelón camagüeyano, pargo asado, enchilado de cangrejos, arroz con mariscos, arroz con pollo, arroz con frijoles negros, moros y cristianos, con gris oriental, malanga, boniato, ajiaco, cascos de naranja agria, cascos de toronja, queso fresco, pastelitos de carne, croquetas, medianoches, café con leche, cafecito, cortadito, rum, robusto cigars, preferably Romeo y Julieta from the island. I will exhaust her menu. I will use her and misuse her like the whore that she is. I will love her forever. I will eat her until she... But no. Like Lord Krishna in the Passage to India story about the lovelorn cowgirl's unheeded call, she does not come. She will never come. Okay, one more passage. Come. Thank you. Oh boy. This is fun. I'm such a ham, I really do. Pathetic. It's pathetic. The Elena Rus, a friend would tell me of the eponymous sandwich, is something marvelous. Indeed, it is quintessentially Cuban, Cuban bourgeois. It was invented at a famous coffee shop of the Havana, rich and trendy, El Carmelo. Among the teens, pepillos and pepillas in the Havana lingo of the day, there was one regular who had a sandwich named after her, Elena Rus, R-U-Z. Soon enough, the sandwich crossed the air-conditioned environs of El Carmelo and moved into the Havana air. It was made on white sandwich bread and consisted of turkey, cream cheese, and strawberry jam. often grilled until the cheese and jam ran together, offset by the mildly salty turkey. It's all these sensations in your mouth, said a fellow enthusiast of Cuban food. Sweet, salty, creamy, juicy, tangy. It's like oral sex. Maybe such thoughts about the nubile Elena inspired the sandwich. I don't know. I met Elena Ruz one time. She was very aged. I don't know if she's still alive. I met her at a hospital. She was having some treatment. And some other young Cuban-American woman said, "Oh, you're Elena Ruz," because there had been a story in the Miami Herald. And I just eavesdropped. I didn't say anything to her. She was, an older lady. In Miami, it's a coffee shop standard, often spelled Ruth, R-U-T-H, perhaps because Ruz, R-U-Z, is Fidel Castro's second patronymic, and no one in Miami wants to read that on a menu. I'm sure, like so many Havana bourgeois pleasures, you had to be there. When I finally moved to Miami, I cruised the Cuban eateries, devouring the food and learning how degraded it was compared to my childhood memories. Still, I am my parents' son, and my parents, which another passage in the book says, were food lovers of vernacular Cuban food and would go to great lengths, would travel practically across the island to get the right pan con lechon or the right smoked pork or something like that. They would go to Valle de Viñales and they would not eat the smoked pork at the bottom of the Valle de Viñales where all the tourists went. They went to this other town where they had the best puerco ahumado. After all, they thought most commercially available Cuban food in their Cuba was mediocre. I remember that in my childhood, I owned a pith helmet, the photo, so I could move through life looking like those explorers I saw in the American movies I loved. I looked ridiculous. I know. But now I wish I had it, for I was a real explorer, a food explorer hacking my way through a jungle, la jungla, of industrial food, forgotten food, nostalgia-feeding food, looking for treasure, like all explorers, fearing I'd be swallowed by the jungle, se lo tragó la selva, before I could rediscover a vessel of sabor. And to find out whether I discovered it or not, you have to buy my book. Now I will take, thank you. I will take questions and hopefully I will answer them. And then after that, I will read a passage from another book. It has nothing to do with Cuba, although it has to do with a Cuban me. And then after that, I will sit here and sign.
I want to know when the audiobook is coming out.
The audiobook?
Yes.
You ask Mitchell those questions. He's in charge of publishing. I'm just the writer. And today, the talker. Yes?
Have you sampled the most degraded contemporary Cuban food in Miami?
The most degraded?
Yes. So the food that you said you were in Cuba in the 80s and you found the food terribly degraded.
No, I didn't say. No, I think I said that about Miami. About Cuba, it was just awful. It's absolutely horrible, inedible.
So that flavor of
Before the paladares, by the way. Before the paladares, it was inedible. The paladares, it became edible again.
So my question is, have you found that Cuban food of the 80s that you found so terrible? Have you found it afterwards in Miami?
The terribleness?
Yes.
No. No, as a matter of fact, when I came back from Cuba on my first trip, I came to Miami, and some of my in-laws, I don't know if it was Noni, I don't know if you were there, I know that Jose was there, picked me up at the airport and I said, "Take me to Little Havana, I gotta have some Cuban food." Even as bad as it was, I wanted to have some Cuban food because there was no Cuban food. And as a matter of fact, there is. The first time I went for the Cuban Film Festival, and the first time I went there, I went to the Cuban Film Festival, and I knew it would happen, that at the end, something that later they didn't do anymore because they didn't have money for it, the guests of the Cuban Film Festival, which included writers like myself, were invited to a reception by Fidel Castro himself. That's when I shook hands with Fidel. You know, and I can tell you an aside, my meeting with Fidel Castro consisted of my saying, we were supposed to say who we were and where we were from. And I said, Enrique Fernandez, Cuban from New York. And he said, oh. And the head of the Cuban Film Festival said, the Village Voice. And he said, ah. That was it. That was it. Anyway, at that reception, there was everything. There was all the great Cuban food I'd missed. And originally, I wanted to call this book Fidel Castro's Tamal en Cazuela, because there was this wonderful potted tamale, which was, there it was. And of course, the Cubans wanted to eat shrimp and things they could not get. But me, coming from the United States, I wanted to have like the real Cuban food, and there it was. And I said, this is one hell of a country. You have to be invited by the head of the country in order to be able to get good Cuban food. And I said, then they cut out that reception, and that was over. But anyway, no, nothing quite as bad. No, absolutely. No, the worst pizza in my life, and believe me, I have a lot of tolerance for pizza. A lot of tolerance. I've eaten some really bad pizza, but this was really a piece of cardboard spread with tomato sauce on it. No. No.
You can buy it now. There's a place in Hialeah that they do special period pizza.
Well, in that case, that's something that I don't know. Special period pizza. Okay. Whatever. You know, it's just like in Rio de Janeiro, you can have a tour of the favelas. Anything can become, you can commercialize anything. Okay. Who knows? You can get the real Cuban pizza here. The real Varadero pizza. And when you go to that place, there's a sign that says, do not be deceived by others who will tell you they have the real Varadero pizza. This is the real Varadero pizza. What did I know? Pizza with plátanos on it, all kinds of stuff. Anyway, more questions? Yes?
So I have two questions. First question is if you can describe to us maybe one or two dishes that you dream of from your youth and wish to savor again. And the second question is, do you think the pre-revolutionary Cuban food will ever come back again, or is it lost?
The second question I'll answer first. I don't know, because it would depend on someone wanting to revive old traditions. And that's not something that people usually want to do. I know that there are celebrity chefs already planning to open restaurants in Miami. I know that a couple of years ago, someone did a meeting of chefs from the U.S. and chefs from the Paladar, some of the best paladares in Havana, did a Paladar pop-up somewhere. And I'm sure the Cubans will learn the techniques of the new cooking and everything else. But the old cooking, which is what I like, I have no idea. The first question, yes, and there is a whole section in the book about it. The dish is arroz con mariscos, which I always loved. And I find it hard to find here, although there were finally a couple of places where I found it. And I was at the Havana Film Festival one time, and I wanted to, Sidney Pollack was there showing his film Havana in Havana. And I wanted to get an interview with him. And the head of the film festival says, come to the Marina Hemingway tomorrow because we're having a party. So I went and crashed that party. And there at the Marina Hemingway, they were serving the arroz con mariscos that I remember from my childhood. It was absolutely marvelous, marvelous. But of course, that is a very elite place. And I was there with American filmmakers, and there's a whole other story there. I mean, never mind. Anyway, but you know, again, another place like that. Now, I must say that when I visited my father's hometown, they made arroz con frijoles every single dish, every single time, and pork dishes and stuff that were very, very good. So what I have to say is mostly about Cuban restaurant cooking. Home cooking is another matter. People manage to do things, which is why I dedicate this book to La Madre del Flaco. And does anybody know who that is? El Flaco is a character in Leonardo Padura's Mario Conde detective stories. And he's not Flaco at all. He used to be. He's fat. He's an Angola vet, which is Cuba's version of a Vietnam vet. And his mother is an amazing cook, and he describes with great detail these fabulous meals that she makes and getting the ingredients God knows where. And that's why I dedicated to this fictional character. Yes, another. Questions? Questions? Lacerations? Yes.
Do you consider, or have you considered in the book, the way that these references to food make their way into kind of Cuban pop culture or language, like un arroz con mango, or like or the piropo involving the rice at the bottom of the pot, or I mean there are many examples, right?
Does anybody eat arroz con mango? That's not a dish, is it? That's just that sounds disgusting. No, really. And who knows? They will open a restaurant called Arroz con Mango, and that will be the signature dish. Anything is possible. No, I did not. Yes.
What's your favorite Cuban restaurant in Miami, if there is one?
My favorite Cuban restaurant in Miami, alas, is no longer, and that is Islas Canarias, and there's a whole section in the book about it. And Islas Canarias was sold, the original one. What? The original one on 27th, it was sold. And of course, books have a long lead time, and that was it. I have a whole section on it. Yeah. It's okay. I mean, some are okay, Havana Harry's. I mean, some of them are okay, but like the only one I really, really like and took people to was that. Here's as close to real Cuban food as you can get. Yes.
Do you agree with the writer?
Oh, by the way, I quote you in the book. You didn't know that. Yeah, you know. Oh, you know that. You know that. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay.
My question is about, you quote at one point, someone else, not me, someone you won't name, a Cuban food writer who admits clandestinely that Dominican food is better.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
I like Dominican food actually better, and I also like Puerto Rican food better. Yes.
And explain why, because I think that you
I like the flavors. The flavors are richer, more pungent, more criollo. The use in Puerto Rican food of culantro and cilantro, which Cubans use sometimes, but not always, of the little ají, the little slightly hot peppers, and other things like that. I think I like asopados. I love salmorejo de jueyes. I really like Puerto Rican food. And Dominican food, Dominicans I find have great taste for food. They somehow get it right. I don't know. I mean, they make the best tostones ever, which is, to me, a tostón or plátano puñetazo, as we called it in Cuba, has to be like crispy throughout, should not have any mushy side. That means it's completely soaked in grease, of course, like a good French fry. And they make it that way, and nobody else does, and they rock, really good. I once had the pleasure, I guess, of having lunch at Julio Iglesias' mansion here in Miami, and he had a Dominican cook, and I said, this man who is richer than God and can afford to have anybody in the world, French, whatever, cook, he has a Dominican cook. I said, okay, that says something. You want me to sing? More questions? Please. Yes.
So why is it different? Do you think that it's the romanticizing the past that the Cuban food in Cuba was better? Or do you actually think that factually it could be that
Better than what?
better than anything you ever had after that when you came here? Because obviously there are pigs, there's rice, there's beans. What makes it different?
In Miami or in Cuba?
What makes it different here? Yeah.
What makes it different here is the industrialization of Cuban food. What began as wonderful stuff. My family lived in Tampa, which has a rich history of Cuban/Spanish food there. But when the exile community came over, and we don't, my family comes from the prehistoric exile. We came here before the revolution. And we would drive to Miami to like soak up in Calle Ocho this wonderful Cuban food because the food was authentic. It still was the food from Cuba being made here with the whatever it was that people had. But with time, it became more American in the sense of like American industrial food and cheap ingredients. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a story. I wrote a story for the Miami Herald on Cuban sandwiches, and I'll now reveal my technique. I was told, first I did some research, and I was told, word of mouth, you know, this place, that place has good Cuban sandwich. So I would go to that place. I would order a Cuban sandwich. I would taste it. Then I would grab my phone, and I would say, oh, they're calling me from work. I have to go. Please wrap it up. I'm going to take it with me. I took it with me. I drove to the next place. I threw it in the garbage. It was inedible. I mean, just horrible, horrible stuff. And I ordered to do the same thing over and over again. I had one bite, and that was it. And places that sometimes were well known for their Cuban sandwiches. The reason why they were so bad is the ingredients were so cheap. And the places where they were good were some of the upscale eateries that were not Cuban exactly. So it lacked some of that Cubanness, but at least it was good bread, good ham, good cheese, and so on. I think that in a way, in Cuba, an excess of capitalism, of communism, socialism, and here an excess of capitalism, and that sort of, it broke the balance on both sides. But who knows what will happen next? We should move on. And where is the musicians? I need them. Here he is. What? The name of the musician is Carlos Andrade, and ¿cómo se llama el cuatrero? ¿No se dice cuatrero? Cuatrista. Naldo Lavoy. Lavoy. Yeah, great musicians. But right now we only need the guitarist. If you can please, if you want to get something to eat or something to drink, I'm going to read something else. What? If you want to do that now, I'll make a little pause and then we'll read.
I have to tell you a funny story. Remember, you may not remember, but next to us in the old bookshop was a place called the Cuban Boy Restaurant. It was a little hole-in-the-wall Cuban restaurant. And the gringo that I am, I used to love yellow rice.
Yeah.
And so I would go, and I would order only like a bowl of yellow rice. Until one day I saw them making the rice in the alleyway behind the bookshop. And instead of saffron, they were squeezing in
Food coloring.
food coloring. I mean, they were actually doing that. It was really wild. And that's probably, you know,
Yeah,
that says it
that's
all.
it. That says it all. Carlito. Carlito. Coño, man. ¿Qué es lo que hay? I'm going to urge you to, and it's something that should be had been printed in the book, but it's not, to go to a website called, one word, FernandezInBlackandWhite.com. That is my website. I have a blog that you might find entertaining. I've had a blog there in Spanish, but I've neglected it for a long time. And I have a text there for anybody to read, which I hope will be published. Where's Mitchell? Mitchell, which I hope will be published. And it's a very different book. It's a different kind of meditation, but it is a meditation. It's also essay. That's all I know how to write. And I will just tell you the name, and it tells you what it's about. It's called pretty to think so. Eros and prostate cancer. And I call it an erotic book about impotence and castration. Qué descarado, caballero. Qué descaro. ¿Quién invitó a este tipo, chico? Okay, let's not be so Cuban. Get it together. La primavera ha venido. Nadie sabe cómo ha sido. Antonio Machado's couplet made sense to me when I first read it, because I was already living in the temperate zone. The seasons were new to me. Fall's colors in southern Indiana, where I had gone to graduate school, amazed me, as did winter's snow. That one eventually wore thin. But spring, I was not ready for spring. Primavera. The old section of Indiana University campus holds a deeply wooded area. At its edge, there's a gazebo where it's said that Hoagie Carmichael was inspired to write Stardust. He certainly composed it at a piano on the second floor of a bookstore a block away from that end of the campus. And they also say that if a couple kisses in that gazebo, they will get engaged. That myth, I know, is not true, because in the fall of 1964, I kissed a girl there, and we did not get engaged. I kissed her lips, and I kissed her breasts. We kept on kissing for another month or so, and though she gladly gave me her bosom, that was all, and I was dying of frustration. Eventually, we drifted away from one another. She married, and so did I, to someone I met on that campus but never kissed on the gazebo. But that night was romantic, even if no piano was playing Stardust a block away. The warmth of Indian summer, the deep woods that opened up before us, the gazebo. Still, I was not prepared for I would discover half a year later. Those woods, in full bloom of spring, were thick with spores, alive. Nature, I realized, was having a shameless public orgasm. And even more than the sweetness of my girlfriend's nipples on my lips, spring, Hoosier spring, was driving me mad with arousal and romance. I found love and sex in my springs, each year surprised what I should have known was coming, nature's drive to engage my senses towards sex. The old line about where a young man's fancy turns when spring comes, which I never understood in my tropical teens. Horniness is too crass a word for it, for the feelings that well within me were both carnal and something else. Something had led men for ages to write poetry like Machado's couplet, like Carmichael's song. I remember days when I felt I just had to have sex. I could think of nothing else. It was a season as temperatures rose, clothes were shed, trees bloomed, and spores, thousands of them, floated in the air. The tropics are sexual all year. This felt more like that instant right before coming, when you know there's nothing you can do to stop it, even if you wanted to, when you surrender to sex because you have no choice. Primavera, just as Botticelli painted her, had me. She held my testicles gently, ready for that tender squeeze. And now she's gone, beautiful Primavera. I knew she'd leave me one day, just not this day, not quite yet. I see a beautiful woman and I wonder if I can spark desire in her, even as if I'm aware that she cannot spark it in me. How can that be? How can sex be gone? How can there be no more spores, no more dappled woods, no more blouses unbuttoned in a gazebo? Sometimes I wonder why I spend lonely nights dreaming of a song. Thank you. And that's to you, publisher.
Enrique Fernandez.
Thank you, Mitchell. Thank you.
And
hero.
I do think we have our next publication as well. Yeah, the books are available up front over there. Enrique will be here to sign it. There's wine, there's some food. Please enjoy yourselves. Thank you all for coming.